People just have big ears, dear.
And Granny, what big eyes you have.
Are we just gonna sit around here and talk about how big I'm getting?
You came here for a reason, didn't you?
Remember back in the 2000s decade when people were just fed up with fairy tales? Sure, in terms of animation, that era was known to be when CG took over the industry and resulted in some of the biggest hits of the medium. However, it was also when moviegoers were becoming cynical of features based on classic fairy tales. They just went through a whole bunch of them with some of Disney's biggest movies back in the 1990s, but then they wanted to see those types of stories get made fun of, resulting in a weird trending subgenre of fairy tale satires. The Shrek movies were said to be the ones that were responsible for that phase, but then there was also Happily Never After, and even Disney was kind of mocking themselves with Enchanted. Not to mention how they never really let go of their cynicism towards old fairy tale tropes, even when they got back to making fairy tale based movies.
Okay, first, I'm not a princess. I'm the daughter of the chief.
Same difference.
No.
If you wear a dress and you have an animal sidekick, you're a princess.
But right in the middle of that period, there was one curious feature that is the perfect animation example of never judging a book by its cover. For deep within its cheaply ugly exterior lies a uniquely comical take of a classical story that gathered quite a following. Yes, if there is one movie that proves that you don't need a big budget to make a good movie, it's Hoodwinked. This is the story of how one independent animated film went through incredible obstacles with its impossibly low budget and got the chance of a lifetime when picked up by Hollywood and became a star-studded sensation. In fact, it was close to becoming the next Shrek, but when it tried to become a franchise, it tripped on its own feet and fell to its doom along with the trend. So, how did Hoodwinked twist the old fairy tale? Well, let's find out. Like some fairy tale origins, our story begins with two brothers. No, I ain't talking about the Brothers Grimm, but rather the Edwards brothers, Corey and Todd. In the 1990s, the two decided they wanted to make bigger projects than what they were working on at the time, and formed their own production company, Blue Yonder Films. After making their first movie in 1997 called Chillicothe, which premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in 1999, the brothers and their company moved to LA in the hopes of making it even bigger in the film industry, which wasn't going well. It wasn't until Sue B. Montgomery, a Hollywood veteran who was an associate producer on the film, set up a meeting for the brothers with one of the movie's investors, entrepreneur Maurice Kanbar. They wanted to discuss about a deal where Kanbar could have some of the rights for the scripts that they sell in exchange to make just enough to maintain a living by paying their rent and some extra so that they could make ends meet. However, Maurice had something else in mind. He'd rather just take one step at a time and focus on producing one feature-length film. But not just any kind of film, he wanted an animated film, since he knew they had experience with the medium in the past where Corey made a short film called Wobots.
Hurt this boy all you want, but hands off me! Wait a minute. Strike that. Reverse it.
After given a month to figure out ideas for an animated film, one type of concept that Kanbar was interested in was fairy tale retellings. Something like Cinderella or Pinocchio, but with a twist. Which does have potential. It is a good idea, but let's set some ground rules here. One, let's not do anything that Disney touched, because in this media-obsessed culture, nothing could ever top the iconography they've established on those stories. And two, it's gotta be a simple story. Something so simple that the filmmakers can have more than enough creative liberties to give it their own unique twist. Maybe something like, I don't know, Little Red Riding Hood or something. You know what? Come to think of it, that one does seem to fit the criteria. Once they picked their fairy tale, Todd was the one who figured out the idea of a Rashomon-style non-linear comedy mystery, where the characters are all in a police investigation, each telling their side of the story, establishing what happened when Red Riding Hood encountered the wolf disguised as her grandma. Kanbar loved the idea so much that he agreed to fully finance it as a direct-to-home media animated feature. He even made a new company with Sue B. Montgomery called Kanbar Entertainment, along with the subdivision Kanbar animation to help Blue Yonder go and create the picture. As for who were creatively in charge, thanks to his experience on Wobots, Corey was said to be the director and co-writer, while Todd was on board as the other co-writer and co-director. And Tony Leach, who previously worked with the brothers on Chillicothe, came on board as the editor, but he ended up contributing so much to the picture that he also got credited as a co-director. All they need by that point was an established budget, and they would be good to go with making an animated movie. Of course, they did get one, but it turned out to be their biggest obstacle that very few computer animated features had to face. Sure, the Edwards and the filmmaking crew were given an admirable amount of creative control, but it literally came at the cost of what could be perceived as an impossibly low budget. Some reports claim that the budget was around 30 or even 15 million. In actuality, Hoodwinked was made for less than $8 million. Even if you adjust the price for inflation, that is still unimaginably low for an animated film that no mainstream studio could be capable of working with. To put it in perspective with some of the cheapest animated films in recent years, the 2019 Addams Family movie had a budget that is 3 times bigger. Sony's most inexpensive animated features like Sausage Party and The Star had more than double the budget. And even Teen Titans Go to the Movies, a film that used the same cost-effective techniques as the show it's based on, had a bigger budget than Hoodwinked. Yes, this did affect the animation greatly, which I will get to later. But having very little money to work with can also drastically affect the storytelling. They can't afford to make revisions or change some of the scenes at any point to improve the story. For the most part, they had no choice but to work with the first draft of the script. By the way, I might as well mention now that during production, yes, the team was very well aware of Shrek making a huge impact when it came out. But despite that, nowadays, people often put Hoodwinked in the category of movies that try to cash in on Shrek's success, the filmmakers tried their best to distance themselves from the ogre style, like avoiding the use of magic and fairies, and make the comedy less cynical and satirical, and more wacky and fueled by the personalities, similar to the Looney Tunes, the Muppets, and even the Simpsons. Speaking of the personalities, to give the classic Red Riding Hood story their own twist, they gave each of the characters a secret identity to show how there was much more to them than their presence in the tale. Little Red Riding Hood, or Red as she's called in the movie, wants to become independent and find her place in the world. Granny is an adrenaline junkie when she's not running her goodies business. The Woodsman is actually a clueless aspiring actor named Kirk, and the Wolf is an investigative journalist who is reminiscent to Chevy Chase in the movie Fletch. The team also added a bunch of new characters to help add to the mystery plotline, like a hyperactive squirrel sidekick for Wolf called Twitchy, a bunny who turns out to be the big villain named Boingo, and a whole bunch of police animals headed by Chief Grizzly. The chief was supposed to be in charge of the investigation, but then when the producers mentioned that the movie is reminding them of the show The Thin Man, the team decided to make a new character to lead the operation, who is a tribute to the Thin Man's Nick Charles, Nicky Flippers. As for the cast, considering how they didn't have much money to work with, they mostly planned on getting friends and family members to provide the voices. Even Corey Edwards himself played the role of Twitchy.
Okay, this is like when he's high on coffee, basically.
Woo, hey!
However, as the story was starting to take full shape, the producers found the courage to ask recognizable actors to play certain parts, which they happily agreed after falling in love with the script. The first big name they got was Patrick Warburton as Wolf, which was then followed by Andy Dick as Boingo, Tara Strong as Red, Sally Struthers as Granny, Tom Kenny as Woolworth the Sheep, Joel McCrary as Chief Grizzly, and David Ogden Stiers as both Kirk and Nicky Flippers. By this point, the process seems to be relatively tame, even with a very limited budget. But if there is one aspect that makes Hoodwinked immediately recognizable, for better or for worse, is how it tried to manage its money with the animation.
The 3D animation techniques used in making Hoodwinked relied on the best computer technology available, along with doing some things the old school way.
Ah yes, the best technology available. And by available, they mean the best technology their budget would allow. The filmmakers were highly aware that they could never afford to have animation that could look as great as something like The Incredibles, which is why they wanted to go for a style that would be a lot more suitable for their budget. Their solution was to develop a design that is reminiscent to stop motion. Yes, this is supposed to look like a stop motion film in the style of The Nightmare Before Christmas and the Rankin Bass specials. Well, they got what they paid for. But in all seriousness, on top of rejecting assets that were popular with mainstream animated films at the time, like swapping realistic detail with cartoonier designs, it encouraged the team to approach this movie with the Hanna-Barbera philosophy, where they put most of their energy on developing strong personalities instead of high-quality animation. Also, because it would have been too pricey for them to hire North American animators, all the visuals were outsourced from Manila in the Philippines. One of the producers, Disney veteran David Lovegren, tried to make a studio in Manila before, but it never really worked out. But with the help of Montgomery, they made another studio called Digital Eye Candy, where they hired around 20 animators to help develop the movie. It was still a pretty tough process to go through, and again, they couldn't afford to fix up most of the mistakes they found, since the animators never had experience with working either on feature films or using any CG software before like Maya, resulting in each of them to work on all the animation aspects instead of each specializing in one element. This isn't ideal, but they were getting the job done and called on the help of Prana Studios in India to put all the visuals together for the final look with the lighting and compositing. But in order to emphasize that this is more of an action film than a fairy tale movie, they hired John Mark Painter of the rock duo Fleming and John to compose the feature, with music that took influence from the Dark Shadow series, the original Planet of the Apes, The Untouchables, and the works of Henry Mancini. At the same time, Todd Edwards wrote several original songs, some of which were highlighted as musical numbers, and others were rock songs meant to spice up the score. And once they managed to achieve what was considered impossible by completing the movie, there was only one more challenge to face that can be considered as difficult as making the movie: finding a distributor. Throughout the production, the producers went all around Hollywood to find a company that would present the picture to the public, including a discussion with DreamWorks, but none of them were able to give a good deal. It wasn't until one trip to the Cannes Film Festival in 2005 where the Edwards found the opportunity of a lifetime with another pair of brothers. But they weren't just any brothers. They were two of the most powerful brothers in the entertainment industry. Yes, it is time to bring back the Weinsteins. Around the same time, Bob and Harvey Weinstein just broke up with Disney and left their position as the heads of Miramax due to a massive fallout over the distribution of the Michael Moore documentary Fahrenheit 9/11, and were just about to start their own studio, the Weinstein Company. They were attending cons to present their latest movie, Robert Rodriguez's Sin City, and that was when Hoodwinked caught their attention. In Harvey's mind, the film would be a great opportunity to be like Jeffrey Katzenberg when his team made Shrek, where they would have their own fairy tale based animated feature that would be a way to get back at Disney at their own game, resulting in the Weinsteins to sign up with Blue Yonder to be the movie's distributor. Surprisingly, unlike other times when he was involved with animation, Harvey didn't cause any damage to the movie's story. Sure, he suggested a few changes here and there, but they were relatively minor, and the filmmakers felt like they were actually helpful. In fact, he even aided the team to get the sound fixed up at Skywalker Sound. However, there was one significant change that Weinstein wanted before showing the film to the world: a major recast. Thanks to his position in Hollywood, Harvey updated a lot of the voices to give the movie an all-star cast. Some did manage to keep their parts, like Patrick Warburton, Andy Dick, and even Corey Edwards, but now the new voices include Anne Hathaway as Red, Glenn Close as Granny, Jim Belushi as Kirk, as well as bringing in Anthony Anderson, Chaz Palminteri, and Exhibit. However, even if they were replaced, Tara Strong and Tom Kenny were still in the movie as a few minor roles, and David Ogden Stiers still kept his part as Nicky Flippers. For the filmmakers, the new cast was personally bittersweet. There was no denying that it was awesome to have all these celebrities be a part of the movie, but the big downside of it was that they arrived way late in the picture's production when all they could do was just replace the old actors with their lines. They didn't have time to get into their respective characters or even have fun with them. It wasn't really a voice acting gig that they were doing, but rather a dubbing job. That and the previous actors didn't get credited for their contribution to those characters, which the filmmakers were disappointed by because they really loved what they've done for the movie. Even Glenn Close was confused with her casting because she felt like Sally Struthers did a great job as is. By the way, I did try to check if there was a cut or even some clips of the movie with the original actors, but honestly, there is literally nothing that you could publicly find of that cut. Maybe that could change after this video and some footage of that would suddenly pop up on the internet. But for now, there is only one version and one version alone of this movie that you could watch. Except for this little piece of red.
I'm looking for Granny Puckett's house.
I'm looking for Granny Puckett's house.
Anyways, Hoodwinked finally made its big debut on December 16th, 2005 in Los Angeles, and then was widely released on January 13th the following year. And the result was interesting. Amongst the critics, they were very much mixed. The biggest setback for the movie was that it was released during the height of Shrek's popularity, so it was inevitable that everyone would compare this to The Ogre and felt turned off by it because it seemed like a cheap knockoff. That, and it was unanimously agreed that, well, there's no other way to say it, the animation is terrible. Sure, there are the excuses of the stupidly low budget and the attempt to emulate the Rankin Bass style, but still though, this looks bad to the point that it can be debatably considered unfinished. And from what I've researched, it kind of is. However, some were able to look past the Shrek comparisons and the bargain bin level of animation and found that the writing did outweigh some of its problems. They enjoyed the twist it gave to the classic fairy tale, the characters were very enjoyable, especially with the actors, and the comedy and its witty dialogue is what had people consider this to be one of the funniest animated films of its time. Even a year later, those same critics started to look back more fondly at the movie, because honestly, it could have been much worse. Say what you will about Hoodwinked, at least it's not happily never after. There were even some that had intriguing perspectives that caught Corey Edwards' eye. One article from Yahoo Voices wrote about how the movie had some political undertones, where comments about the problems with capitalism and the free enterprise system, especially with the character of Boingo. Another from Time wrote about the possible negative consequences of kids watching fairy tale satires instead of showing them the original source material, pointing at movies like Shrek and Hoodwinked as prominent examples. Edwards did respond to those two articles, saying that he never intended to make the movie political in any way. In fact, he even said that it was just a coincidence that some of the cops are literally pigs. And that he actually completely agreed with Time by saying, as the writer-director of Hoodwinked, it may surprise you that I couldn't agree more with James Poniewozzik's article. Even as I was making the film, I asked myself the same question. Are we parodying something that kids should have the chance to experience first, unparodied? We went to great lengths to distance our film from Shrek's humor. And no, I don't think Shrek considers kids. I hope that Hoodwinked and its sequels will be seen as trying to do something genuine with its characters, rather than look at the next joke at the expense of innocence. We all need the real folklore of fairy tales, whether we admit it or not. But regardless of what critics may think, the movie did manage to win over audiences and achieve what many independent animated features dreamed of accomplishing. On its opening 4-day weekend, it started off in second place with $16.9 million and was only $50,000 away from beating Glory Road at number 1. And when Hoodwinked made its full theatrical run, the film that cost less than $8 million ended up making $51.4 million domestically and a worldwide total total of $110 million. The movie earned around 14 times more than how much it cost. There are studio executives who wish that they could make something that could do those kinds of numbers. But like I said, as time moved on, Hoodwinked did gradually gain a following, and while the only award recognition it got was a Saturn Award nomination, there are still a lot of fans who give this a lot of love as much as others have with Shrek. However, with a fan base and success that the movie ultimately got, it was inevitable that the movie received the kind of treatment that most box office hits get after their big win. Now that the team was done with Hoodwinked, it was time to get started on Hoodwinked 2.
Get ready.
Rescue Team Alpha. Move in. Move in.
You got mad skills.
You swine. For the sequel.
We're to huff and puff and blow your house up!
That's not good. Hoodwinked 2. Hood versus Evil.
Around the same time as the first movie's wide release, Corey Edwards revealed that his team was already at work on a sequel called Hoodwinked 2: Hood vs. Evil, and even got some of the core ideas already developed, including a secret hood society that Red is a part of, and how she and Wolf have to team up to fight against a new set of villains. However, while the creative heads like Corey Todd and Tony Leach did come back to write the script, none of them wanted to direct. At least for Corey's part, there were several reasons to why he didn't take his old top position back. One was because he wanted to expand his opportunities as a filmmaker and not be stuck as either just an animation guy or as the Hoodwink guy. Two was because he was starting to hate the fairy tale satire genre that Shrek popularized. And three was because, well, he had a pretty bad time directing the movie. In his own words, Corey stated, "The biggest reason is that, to be as diplomatic as I can, I did not have a good experience with some key players on the first film. To put it lightly, I was not treated well. I have no interest in working with people like that, plain and simple. Life's too short." So if none of the original creators wanted to direct, then who did? Enter Disney animator Mike Diza, whom, despite never seeing the original when offered the job in early 2007, he was more than happy to take it, especially when he found that the movie's world had a much more progressive viewpoint on gender roles than what Disney was doing at the time. But back onto Hoodwinked 2. As it is a sequel, the movie also came with a whole bunch of new characters that turn Hoodwinked into a much larger fairy tale world that goes beyond the realms of Little Red Riding Hood, and expand the cast with even more big name actors. Along with the old crew coming back, there were the Three Little Pigs, voiced by Cheech Marin, Tommy Chong, and Phil Lamar, the Giant and the Magic Harp Jimmy Tenstrings, played by Brad Garrett and Wayne Newton, respectively, the Witch Verushka, done by Joan Cusack, Heidi, played by, well, Heidi Klum, and the new villains Hansel and Gretel, voiced by Amy Poehler and Bill Hader. However, with this new roster of actors, it also came with a catch where some changes had to be made. Anne Hathaway saw a significant boost to her career where she was too big to come back to some small animated film where she would have to play a little girl again, which was why she was replaced by Hayden Panettiere as Red. Also, Jim Belushi refused to return because, as much as he loved the first movie, he wasn't comfortable doing any accents. So Martin Short came in to be the new voice of Kirk. And then there is Twitchy, who was still voiced by Corey Edwards, but fans immediately noticed that his voice was completely off. Instead of speeding Corey's voice to 150%, all they did in the sequel was just put his pitch up really high.
I got Burley and I got the gear. I was watching the girl like you told me to, the girl in the red hood.
Yeah, the girl in the red hood. Did you see where she went?
She went past the porcupines and the redbird's tree and the guy with the long beard, and now she's up the creek and she sings everywhere she goes. She's like, la 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 la. Wolf, I have been waiting for you to say that. You gotta get back in the game. The HEA needs you. You got mad skills. Red needs you.
Anyways, now with both Canbar and Weinstein on their side and more confident with Hoodwinked, the sequel received a more robust budget that the team could work with at $30 million, where now instead of working with Filipino animators, they worked closer to their homes with Canadian animators at Arc Productions, now called Jam Filled Entertainment, who used more software than just Maya to craft the animation and create a new modern fairy tale world for the Happily Ever After agency. Now, I will will say that considering the past stories I've looked at when the Weinsteins get involved with an animated project, it's kind of surprising to see them be this competent with Hoodwinked, having no trouble or conflicts with the creative team, and actually seeing some legitimate success in return. It's like if the whack job Weinstein we all know that ruins everything wasn't involved with the first Hoodwinked. That's because they showed up for the sequel. Originally, Hoodwinked 2 was supposed to be released on January 15th, 2010. However, as they were getting close to that date, the Weinstein Company decided to delay it. They weren't really specific as to why or when it would come out instead, but they said that it was because the animation needed some fine-tuning and they wanted to focus their marketing energy on another movie released around that original time, Youth in Revolt. However, there was something that seemed a bit off, especially when Burger King was promoting the movie around that same time with their toys, despite having no official new release date. I understand revisions and spacing out release dates, but seriously, what's with the holdup? Well, if there was at least one good reason for the big delay, Canbar took the Weinsteins to court. On March of 2010, Canbar Entertainment sued the Weinstein Company for mostly neglecting the movie's release, or at least not consulting with them in terms of an actual release plan. That, and they were also being neglectful in terms of their financial contributions as co-financers after February of 2009, and ghosting them whenever they need their input on changes to the movie. Sure, Canbar said that they were ready to fully finance the feature like before, and they did have the final say on any production decisions, but that doesn't change how Weinstein signed a deal with them and that the company didn't abide to it. But regardless, the lawsuit was ultimately settled, and consequently, it wouldn't be until more than a year for the sequel to finally have a release date on April 29th, 2011. And, how can I put this? You know how some people were so turned off by the animation quality of the first that they were expecting everything about it was going to be absolutely terrible? This sequel is what those people thought the first was going to be. The reviews didn't just turn out to be bad, it was collectively hated, especially from critics, to the point that many consider it one of the worst movies of that year. Whatever people enjoyed from the original were all completely gone. It had no charm, no wit, and even lost all the elements that made the first different from Shrek, resulting in a feature that one critic said it best that if ever there was a movie that should have gone straight to video, or better yet, never have been made, this is it. Even Corey Edwards and Patrick Warburton admitted that this was a serious disappointment and that it doesn't have the soul of the original. And with a movie that is universally hated by critics, fans, and even the people who worked on the movie, the film turned out to be equally disastrous at the box office. Sure, $30 million is still considered relatively low for a budget, but it wasn't even able to have its earnings reach those numbers with just $10.1 million domestically and $23.1 million worldwide. Ultimately, because of its unbearable sequel, Hoodwinked turned out to be one of those movies that tried to be a franchise, but after just one sequel, the entirety became a complete train wreck and lost its relevancy along with it. Nowadays, the original is definitely far from being the most talked about animated movie, and I don't think many people would consider it to be the most exemplary one either. But looking back at the kind of movie that it is and what it went through in order to be made, I will say that it is undeniably a very interesting case. When it comes to Hoodwinked, it has a very unique place in animation history as one of the first independently funded computer animated features. What it went through was a grueling process, and one that is not recommended to emulate to create such an ambitious project with an unmanageably low budget. But the end result more than paid off as the movie achieved the Hollywood dream and became one of the most unexpected hits of its time, going from a simple low-budgeted cartoon meant to go straight to DVD to earning a big-name distributor who provided an all-star cast and becoming a box office smash by reaching up to the 9-digit mark while collecting a notable fan base over the years. Yes, it did follow with one of the worst attempts of a sequel, but that doesn't change how the making of Hoodwinked is one of the most fascinating underdog stories in animation, proving that even the smallest project can achieve the biggest dreams. It certainly is a true once-in-a-lifetime kind of picture that can only be done under specific circumstances, for better or for worse, and that's what makes Hoodwinked such an admirably unique film. It will forever be known as a movie unlike any other. Because who the fridge would be crazy enough to want to go through what they did and expect to have the same results?
He should get a life.
Indeed.